This lecture is going to cover the time around 1490 when Christopher Columbus was trying to find support for his voyage across the ocean to Asia. Well, what was going on in the 13 and 1400s in Europe? First, the whole continent was recovering from a bubonic plague, otherwise known as the Black Death, which killed about a third of the entire European population. And then on top of that, England and France were waging what was literally a 100 years war from 1337 to 1453. This war interrupted trade routes and forced Mediterranean merchants from places like Venice to use ships instead of caravans to get around all the fighting and deliver their goods to northern European markets. Merchants learning to sail around the Iberian Peninsula, which is modern-day Portugal and Spain, began a process that would soon see many European countries become naval powers. These traders had a few advantages, however, in the form of Chinese navigation tools that became widely available in Europe around this time, things like the compass or the astrolabe. The fighting in Europe also increased nationalism in countries, creating stronger leaders and a desire among the people of these countries to be better than other nations in some way, politically or with a better military, or having more cool stuff. At the same time, new technologies like the printing press allowed more people to learn about the world outside of Europe. Marco Polo, a famous traveler, published a book with this printing press called Travels, which described his trip to China and told of an ocean off of the eastern coast of that country. This description made some Europeans believe that they could sail west from Europe to land in China, rather than taking the long trip along the Silk Road. The most luxurious goods in the world, silk, jewels and jewelry, gold, and spices, all came from East Asia, so there was a lot of interest in finding a more convenient trade route to the east that didn't involve the Mediterranean merchants that set very high prices on their goods. At its most basic form, European society could be boiled down to a pyramid-like hierarchy. The people at the top were in charge, the people at the bottom served those above them, and so on up the line, with various levels of power in the middle of the pyramid. Although slavery wasn't big among Europeans, non-Christians could be enslaved according to the church. Instead, the closest thing to slaves in Europe were serfs, who were laborers that were tied to the land on which they worked. Most Europeans lived in small villages and worked as farmers. Villagers depended on each other, since every 2 to 3 years they would have to let their own fields lay fallow, meaning that they couldn't plant anything for a year while the land recovered essential nutrients. During that time, farmers would have to depend on the crops that the neighbors grew. On farms, men did the majority of the field work and herded the livestock, but women would be found in the fields during planting and harvest seasons. Women took care of children and household tasks, and hunting was mostly for sport because of the availability of domesticated animals. In cities, men might be shopkeepers or artisans, craftsmen. Women would often assist their husbands in business. Without a doubt, women were second to men in medieval society. Aside from a few women who were born into power, like Queen Elizabeth I, for example, most were kept from participating in politics. This exclusion extended to religious and everyday social life. The Catholic Church, which is based in Rome, was the dominant religion in Europe. This will become much more important when we get to talk about the reasons for English immigration to the New World. Part of Christian doctrine was to encourage missions, where missionaries, good Christians, would go and try to convert non-believers to the Christian faith. This motive for exploration would continue to grow over the course of the next couple hundred years. Alright, that's it. Don't forget, if you have questions, write a comment or bring them to class, fill in your identifications with all the things you learned in this chapter, and take the quiz for video 1-3.